The 26th of July 2020 was the date that I had chosen to commit suicide, and it felt like a relief. I just felt like I was in this inescapable internal chaos that never switched off. It was like this big, heavy black cloud that just sunk on my body every day. When I was young, my parents split when I was about 18 months old, and my brother and I were split as children, so he was about 4 years older than me. And I went with my mother, and I had a very hard time with her. She was a very challenging person, very abusive emotionally, physically. She abused alcohol a lot. I guess I never felt protected, I never felt loved. I was often abandoned. Yeah, just all the things that a parent should give a child, like unconditional love, and to have that never be given to you is a very challenging thing to grow up with. Growing up, I never really understood that it was abuse. It just seemed normal, and I often wished that I just had a mum that loved me, unconditionally, and nothing I ever did or was ever good enough. When I was 15, I left home, and I was sort of homeless for a little while, so I couch surfed and that sort of thing, and then I sort of lost my way, and through high school I never really knew what I wanted to do, I guess without proper guidance or leadership from a parental role model. It made it difficult to navigate life and relationships. I always wanted to be somebody's person in their time of need because I never had anybody there for me. And so to be able to provide that for strangers really felt like my calling. Because I grew up with, and I know a lot of people overuse the word narcissist, but my mother had bipolar and a lot of narcissistic traits as well. And she was often unmedicated and would drink quite a lot. And so I grew up in an abusive home with a lot of manipulation, and it has actually inadvertently allowed me to be really good at my job because I can read body language really well, because I needed to, as a little girl, be able to identify what mood my mother was in before she spoke so that my behaviour would change so I wouldn't get hurt. So it actually made me a better paramedic in that way. But on the flip side, when you grow up in abuse, you often repeat the abuse. And so I would seek out partners where that pattern was repeated. As strange as it sounds, that is a familiar feeling, that's a familiar place. And whilst I knew that it wasn't necessarily good for me, it felt safe and it felt normal, because my normal with what I got raised, I didn't realize that was bad. And so I kept dating, it felt like many different people, but it was the same person because I hadn't dealt with all of this underlying childhood trauma. And I still work through it, like it's a work in progress. You don't just one day wake up and you're like cured from all your childhood trauma. Like I'd never seen what a functioning, loving relationship was. So how, as an adult, could I have chosen good partners or had healthy, functioning relationships? Once I left high school, I think I was quite lost. I had no guidance, I had no idea. I was searching for validation and love and happiness from things external to myself, like men. And I, again, would often choose the wrong partner because I felt like if somebody just loved me, then I would be okay. But I didn't know what love looked like, what love felt like. But one key thing that I didn't realize was that until I loved myself, it didn't matter what anyone else did. And that was a lesson I only really learned a couple of years ago, honestly. Like that's a journey that I've taken and has taken some time. I suppose with my ex-husband, he was from America. We fell in love very quickly. He just promised me the world and loved me the way that I'd always wanted to be loved. I felt seen, heard, valued. I was going to immigrate over there. We were going to get a ranch, and I was going to get out of paramedicine and start something totally new with the person that I loved. I think I was so enamored and captured in this fairy tale that he had created. I must have missed the red flags, or I didn't want to see them. I don't know how I missed who this person was. Yeah, we got married after knowing each other 7 months. I'd never experienced this kind of happiness, this lightness, this hope. Like, it was just a totally different Marissa. Like, I was like, finally, my fairy tale, the escape, like, my life can finally start, you know. And it was a week after we had gotten married that I had found out that he had been unfaithful our entire relationship, and continued to be as I tried to work through that with him. It was at the point where I had sold all my furniture. I had one suitcase left, and that suitcase was coming back home one last time, and then with that suitcase I was flying over there and I was immigrating. And so I had nothing. I had no home. I had no clothes. Thankfully, I didn't give up my job, and this was right at the start of COVID. And so I was due to escape, and it crushed me. It was just hard, because you have this, it's not just the person, it's the life, it's the idea of where your life was going to go. Like, you hinge so much hope. I felt like I'd lost everything. He had told me, like, I'm sorry, like, for better or worse, like, please help me through this, please. Like, I have a problem, like, I need help, please. You're my wife, like, I love you. The caregiver in me, obviously. I love this person. I wanted to make it work, and the last straw was when he came here for the last time, to Harvey Bay actually, and he met my family for the first time, like my dad. I didn't tell them because they would have hated him, and I didn't want that. And he went fishing with my dad, and I went through his iPad and he was still cheating. He flew back to the States, and then I told him it was over. That was hard. Like, I was so embarrassed to tell that story. Like, I told everyone I was leaving. I wasn't going to be a paramedic anymore. I was happy. I had this fairy tale. It was all over social media. Everybody knew. And so to face that, I was just really ashamed that I was so dumb. I couldn't have stayed. You lose trust. That's a foundation that everything is built on. Like, you can't get, I just knew I couldn't get back from that. I found out, it was pretty much the week that our annulment went through, that he was actually engaged to one of the girls he was cheating on me with. And I had sent him back the rings because I didn't want anything to do with him. I felt like that was the right thing to do. And he reused the diamond. I mean, it was tough because I then had to get back on track full time. Literally a couple weeks later, COVID hit. So I actually studied at Sunshine Coast University. I was one of the first cohorts to go through. And when I graduated, I got posted straight to Mount Isa. I didn't know where Mount Isa was. It took me 3 days to drive there. It was a baptism of fire, put it that way. It was, and literally with the heat.
I was the officer in charge at Mount Isa, and Marissa arrived out there, young, keen, enthusiastic for the world.
Yeah, Matt was my OIC, my officer in charge, and Matt has seen me through my whole career. And it's so funny because in my last station that I'll ever probably work at, he's my officer in charge here. So it was kind of like a nice loop close. Yeah, I learnt, a lot. It's very different in the Isa to what we see here. Lots of different challenges, diverse clientele, challenging conditions, environments, not a lot of resources. You got to think a lot on your toes.
You know, it's challenging. You're newly married, you've relocated, and you started a new job. You know, you put those three things together, that's a big ask for a young woman of Marissa's at the time.
So I grew a lot in Mount Isa just as a clinician. It was good and I loved it. The first few years were great. You come in bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, saving lives, like this is awesome. Then you hit sort of at around 4 or 5 years, most paramedics start to get a little bit jaded. So we're starting to see that I went to university for 3 years to train all these high-tech skills, and I'm getting called to someone who's had a nightmare. But then you'll get big jobs and you'll save lives and you're getting a lot of life-saving banked under your belt, and you're getting cool stories and experiences. And I think paramedicine is one of the few jobs where you can say that every single day I have an opportunity to change someone's life. And whether that's simply saving someone's life, most commonly it's just being there for somebody. I mean, when people call 000, those people with those jobs that I was getting frustrated from, in that person's life, like that is their nightmare, literally. That's their chaos, right? It's not up to me to go, oh, that's actually not, you don't fall 000 for that. For that person, that individual, like that's a big deal for them. You just walk into a job and you just calm the chaos. To be that person for people and to walk in when people are in complete chaos and you walk up to them and you just calm them down and bring them back in their body and make them feel like they're safe. I never had that. And so I'm able to do that at least once a day in my job. So rewinding back, my marriage had terminated and then being replaced, the chaos, the media, and we were on the front line. And we had no idea what this beast was. We had to gown up, wear these gowns, big goggles, these duckbill masks and gloves in the Queensland Hervey Bay humid heat and do CPR. It was horrible. I remember when I would go to bed, my head would hurt and I would feel the back of my head and look at my hand and there would be blood on it because the mask that we had to wear constantly and change every patient was cutting so deep into my skull that it was like causing trauma to my head. And it was just scary and the community was scared. We would go to patients who really needed to go to hospital for like a cardiac condition, like elderly people, but they would be too scared to go to hospital because they'd be scared they'd get COVID. Like I didn't want to get it. Like I have an elderly dad. It was scary and hard and our workload was through the roof and the hospital was just as like, we didn't know. We were just taking it day by day. And the calls don't stop. Like other people were, like their work would stop or they could work from home or we couldn't. Like we still had to turn up. So I found it really hard and there was no escape. So there was no escape at work, there was no escape at home. I was just not doing very well at all.
Marissa probably at the time wasn't reaching out to people, but she was troubled. There was challenges there I could see because I did know her, but she was very shuttered and difficult to try and tease out what was going on.
The 26th of July 2020 was the date that I had chosen to commit suicide. That was my wedding anniversary and it felt like a relief when I had decided and made a plan. I just felt like I was in this inescapable internal chaos that never switched off. It was like this big heavy black cloud that just sunk on my body every day and I couldn't escape it and it was suffocating. Every day at work, every little inconvenience, anything was just adding weight to this thing that was on me.
You know, it's hard for her probably to trust. She's had broken hearts. She's had people let her down. And through up to that sort of period, and she'd been unstable. You know, she'd moved and moved again and moved again and moved again. You know, it was like she was searching for utopia or the holy grail, but never being able to find it.
It seems grim now, like talking about it like this, but when I had set that date, like it was, like it will end soon. Like there's an end point. I don't have to go through this anymore. Like I'll be free. And that's all I wanted. I just wanted to be free of all the things that were like slowly killing me. And I thought, okay, so now I've got the date, I've got the plan, I've got the place, everything's in order. What do I want to do before I die? And I was like, well, I used to ride a lot when I was younger and I really enjoyed that. And so I Googled on Google and Susan River Homestead. And I had said, are you guys still taking rides at the moment? And he said, oh, well, unfortunately, because of COVID, for it to be profitable, we need to take 2 riders at a time. And I said, well, what if I just paid for 2, but it was just me? And he was like, oh. And so then every week I would pay an exorbitant amount of money to go and ride a horse for 2 hours. And Abby, who's Norm's granddaughter who runs the riding at the homestead now, did back then as well. We laugh about it now because we're actually good friends. because she just never knew what Marissa she was going to get. She would either get the sad, broody, like not talking Marissa that would just cry on the horse the whole time, or she might just get the angry Marissa that still didn't speak, or maybe I'd speak occasionally, but I would oscillate between the two. But I'll never forget, I started riding on a horse called Kiara, and I would go riding rain, hail or shine, and Abby knew that. It could be like hammering down rain and Abby would be like, Marissa's coming today, we're still going out. I would not miss a day. It was so slow, but so discernible within myself that things were changing for me. Like, horses are just incredible creatures. Like, they're just such healing entities without even trying, right? Like, they hold space for you, they have this calm energy about them, and they just soothe the soul without doing anything other than existing. Every time I would go out there, I would feel a little less heavy. And so one day I said to Abby, could I maybe buy Kiara? She said, oh, give me a second, just let me make a call. And so Abby gets on the phone to Norm and he said, oh, not Kiara, but I've got a horse in mind. Abby said, oh, there's this chestnut gelding down in one of the side paddocks and we'll go ride by him. And if you like him, next time you come out, take him on a ride and you can have him. We're walking initially and then she described him. It was this chestnut gelding with a white blaze. His name was Caesar. I just remember walking down the hill and then my walk turned into a trot. And then I was like, I see him. My horse Kiara hadn't even come to a stop and I jumped off and I threw the reins at Abby. And I walked over to Caesar and he, as if he knew me and he'd been waiting for me his whole life, and he just lifted his head and I pulled my head out. And he dropped his head into my hand. And I just knew like he was mine and I was his, and that was it. I think that was the moment that changed my life really in a big way, because I had a horse now, so I couldn't die because he needed someone to give him hay. So yeah, I ended up buying him. I rode him and I've got photos of that first ride, and that was it. Like, that was the moment, like that plan that I had disintegrated, and Caesar was my world. It was put on this earth to heal people. He is such a beautiful horse. He's so sensitive. He's like a big Labrador. He let me cuddle him, and he closes his eyes when you kiss him. Like, he's just the best. And like, I always understood that horses had some healing capacity, but I never really knew how powerful that was until that horse saved my life that day. When all of that marriage breakdown had happened and I had gone through all that heavy feelings and the feelings of suicide and that, and so I moved back down to the Gold Coast, and obviously I took Caesar. And I got very, very sick. I was hospitalized. I was in hospital for over a week. I had COVID. I had 5 kidney stones and I had urosepsis. I had to have emergency surgery. And I had nobody, mind you. Like, I had a friend drive me to the hospital because as if I'm going to call an ambulance. And I walked myself in and I had fevers of over 40. I had a systolic blood pressure of 60. I had a heart rate of like 140. I was sick. This was when I understood how patients felt and how dehumanizing COVID was for the patient, because I was the patient now. And because they were still quite hesitant to tube people for surgery, they opted for an epidural. And there was a slight complication with the epidural, and so I remained numb for days, and I thought I was paralyzed. Like, I had to have a catheter. I had bed sores because I had COVID and they weren't rolling me, and I couldn't move. Like, I was just laying in this bed. No visitors, no nothing, nobody, alone. Caesar was still everything to me. I hinged everything on this horse. And then there were those big floods that ripped through in 2021, I'm pretty sure it was, on the Gold Coast. And I got a phone call from the lady who I kept Caesar with, telling me that Caesar was gone and that the floods went down to the paddock to get him, and they were trying to pull him up. The floodwaters were fast and coursing through livestock horses. So many went, and he got taken. Like, they watched him get swept away. And so I'm in this hospital bed I think the day before I had finally started, I could move my toes and my legs were starting to work a little bit. And I said, I've got to go. Like, my horse has been taken by the flood. Like, I have to find him. I have to go. And they're like, oh, you can't go yet. And I said, take this catheter out of me. I'm going. Yeah, I don't know if any females have experienced getting a catheter removed. It is not a good time. And then I got my friend to pick me up, and then I went and started driving to try and find my horse. Mind you, my legs aren't working. I shouldn't have been driving. I drove every way, every single way that I knew possible to get to where he was, and every way was flooded. The last place that I drove, I went up this hill, and as soon as I looked down the hill and I got out of my car and I collapsed, like my whole life was gone. Like, what was I gonna do? I was wailing. And I just remember the pain, like, it was way worse than the pain I felt for my ex-husband. Like, it was like a pain. I'd never experienced that, and I collapsed. And then total strangers I'd never met lifted me up. Someone drove my car down to someone else's house and they carried me. And I'm still so sick, like my legs aren't working properly, you know. And I remember they sat me down at this stranger's house, and all these people from the community came and they wrapped towels around me, and I'm shaking because I'm still sick, like I shouldn't have left hospital. And they were like, okay, we'll get him, like, we'll get in canoes, we'll do it. And all these complete strangers are showing me such kindness, you know. And that made me like gain a little more faith in the world, because I think as a paramedic you get jaded against people, and that reminded me there's still good people. But obviously, like, we couldn't go. Like, they would die, like we would die. It's dangerous, you know, if it's flooded, forget it. And so I went home. I would be lying if my head didn't flick straight back to suicide. And I think that's one thing I learned from my experiences that I share with people, is I think it takes so long initially to get to that idea of suicide. But once you've been there once, if you get triggered enough to get back there, the latency is way less. And so again, that's why redundancy is important. We have lots of different things. We put lots of things in between you and that thought. Then that next day, I got a phone call, and Karen said that the neighbours had Caesar and that he's beat up, but he's alive. And I was like, oh, thank God. Like, I don't know at that point in my life what I would have done if that horse had died in that moment. It took him about 5 months to recover. He got an infection in his blood. He was all cut up. It could have gone either way. He had a waterproof rug on, and that could have drowned him, but instead it shielded him from the wires and all the debris that was in the water. I remember the neighbours saying, man, that horse had something to live for. And they said, I reckon you gave that horse a reason to live. I think I learned a lot of lessons, you would hope, from all of my experiences over the years. And I think a major takeaway is the need for redundancy. And what I mean by that is I hinged everything on a relationship, and then I hinged everything on a horse. And if you hinge everything on one thing and you lose that thing, you do have nothing. And so the consequences can be quite dire. So what we need to do as people is we need to have lots of different things that make us happy and fill our cup. And that's different. What works for you is different to me. And so I guess what's important is understanding who you are as an individual. So I had to go through a whole journey of understanding who was Marissa, because I had no idea who I was at all until only a few years ago.
One day, basically out of the blue, she rang me and said, again, can I come back to Harvey Bay? And again, I said, yeah, sure. But when she came back, there was a difference in Marissa. There was more of the glow back. There was more of the self-assurance. There was more self-confidence. There was a lot of growth and maturity that had occurred. And to me, a lot more probably insight into herself as an individual.
And so it's very important that we go through that journey, because without knowing who you are, you don't know what makes you happy. And you also don't know what makes you sad. When you really know yourself, and now I really know myself, I know when my pressure valve is about to burst. And so for me, the tools that I've found that work really well, obviously equine therapy, time with my horse, time outside. There's a lot of evidence and research that suggests humans, we are outside beings. So seeing open spaces is actually really good for us. I love animals, dogs, like I've got a little beagle, Calvin. and a cat. I have 3 different species. I love animals, what can I say? I think it was dangerous for me coming home to an empty house. So as a single woman for so long, it was important for me to fill my home with love, and that love comes from my animals. I found going to the gym as well, so weight training and stuff like that's really good. Move your body, releases really good endorphins, helps me sleep as well. I go for walks every day. One thing that I have gotten better at now is talking to people. I know the people around me knew that I wasn't having a great time, but not many people, if any, knew how close I was to, executing that plan. So when I actually eventually did open up, and even opening up and telling people was hard, we've come a long way with mental health. And I know that if one of my peers came to me and said, I'm feeling sad, or I'm worried, I'm feeling suicidal, it wouldn't be met with judgment, but I was judging myself, and I felt like others would judge me, and it was very opposite. And so being open and vulnerable with people in my corner that I trusted is something that I do a lot better. And after understanding myself better, I know what my telltale signs are that I'm not doing well. And so what I did, and what I encourage people to do when I go around and speak about this stuff, you tell the people in your corner who you trust what your telltale signs are. So then they see it. If you're not opening a dialogue, they can. It's important that you're connected